You thought the local neighborhood tailor completely vanished because mass-produced clothes simply got way too cheap. You were absolutely wrong. You step onto a scarred, creaking wooden pedestal. You stare intently into a three-way mirror while cold steel pins sharply pinch the bottom hem of your brand-new trousers. You hold your breath slightly as a man with a yellow tape measure draped loosely around his neck kneels down, making a quick, precise white dash with chalk against the heavy gray wool. Buying a garment directly off the retail rack was merely the starting line. It was never the finished product. That required the local tailor. Every neighborhood had one. Usually, it was a narrow, dimly lit storefront tucked quietly between a bustling bakery and a neighborhood hardware store. Inside, the air hung heavy with the distinct smell of steam, hot iron, and dry lint. Spools of cotton thread in every conceivable shade lined the back wall like a mosaic. A heavy-duty, cast-iron Singer sewing machine hummed endlessly like an idling engine. The person standing behind that cluttered counter intimately understood the complex architecture of human bodies. They knew exactly how to take in a waist, drop a hem, or taper a sleeve so the heavy fabric draped cleanly over your shoulders. Garments from this era were constructed fundamentally differently than they are today. They possessed generous seam allowances. Extra inches of fabric were deliberately folded over and securely sewn deep inside the interior lining specifically so the piece could be let out gradually as you aged or taken in sharply if you lost weight. You did not simply discard a perfectly good coat just because it pinched slightly at the ribs. You took it down the street to the professional. To understand why this was normal, you have to look at what a wool suit actually cost the average worker in 1965. A decent, worsted wool suit easily required a substantial percentage of your monthly income. It was a true, long-term investment. You treated it with a high level of daily stewardship. You brushed the wool meticulously. You hung it faithfully on proper, shaped cedar forms. And when the interior seams eventually strained, you happily paid the craftsman a few dollars to expertly adjust the structural architecture. This was a highly localized, perfectly balanced ecosystem of textile expertise. The distant manufacturer simply built the initial foundational shell. The local artisan engineered the final fit. The wearer proudly maintained the asset for a decade or more. Your tailor knew your right arm was a quarter-inch longer than your left. They knew your posture slouched slightly, requiring a specific, calculated tension in the collar. The clothes fit you flawlessly. They were mechanically altered to perfectly match the unique, physical topography of your exact frame. Buying clothes was a two-part transaction. The department store provided the raw materials. The tailor provided the final, necessary precision. But the perfection of that fit relied on an economic reality that was about to fracture entirely. World War II forced a logistical problem that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with cloth. The military needed to clothe millions of young men rapidly, efficiently, and cheaply. Measuring every single conscript for a bespoke uniform was mathematically impossible. The government conducted massive anthropometric studies, measuring the chests, waists, and inseams of over 100,000 soldiers. They looked for statistical averages. They crunched the data to create a predictive matrix of human proportions. This data birthed the concept of standardized sizing. A size 40 regular was no longer just a loose guideline. It became an industrial mandate. After the war, retail manufacturers saw the extreme financial efficiency of this system. They adopted the military's statistical buckets for the civilian market. Instead of making a garment that could be adjusted to fit anyone, they made garments designed to roughly fit a statistical median. Their retailers realized they could move vastly more inventory if they forced human bodies into these preset buckets. Sizes 2 through 12, small, medium, large. You were no longer an individual geometry, you were an approximation. Buying a shirt meant finding the bucket that was least offensive to your proportions. This sizing matrix fundamentally broke the mental model of clothing construction. Manufacturers began stripping away the generous seam allowances that defined early 20th century tailoring. Extra fabric inside a hem or waist was no longer seen as a mark of quality or a necessity for future alterations. It was viewed purely as wasted raw material on the factory floor. The garments became rigid shells, cut exactly to the statistical average and not a millimeter more. The neighborhood tailor felt this squeeze immediately. Then taking out a waistline became physically impossible because the manufacturer had deliberately removed the extra half-inch of wool required to do it. The clothes were engineered to be finite. If a size 38 pinched your shoulders, the retailer's solution was no longer to send you to the tailor to have the seams released. The solution was to sell you a size 40 and let the waist bag loosely around your belt. The consumer was slowly being trained to accept mediocrity in the drape and cut of their wardrobe. The cultural expectation shifted from precision to proximity. It was close enough. But the real killer of the neighborhood tailor wasn't the standardized sizing chart. It was the fabric itself. Once clothes were engineered to stretch, the physical definition of fitting completely changed. In the middle of the 20th century, chemical companies began aggressively pushing synthetic fibers into the commercial textile market. Polyester, nylon, and eventually elastane completely rewrote the physical rules of how a garment behaved. Traditional fabrics like rigid cotton, heavy wool, and crisp linen possessed zero inherent give. If a cotton shirt was cut too narrowly across the back, it restricted your movement. It pinched, it pulled. It demanded a physical intervention from a tailor to correct the tension. Synthetics erased that friction. The invention of spandex, originally branded as Lycra in 1959, allowed manufacturers to weave microscopic elastic filaments directly into the warp and weft of everyday clothing. A pair of trousers no longer needed to be meticulously cut to accommodate the exact curve of a thigh. The fabric would simply stretch to mask the discrepancy. The garment compensated for the manufacturer's lack of precision. This chemical intervention allowed factories to produce even fewer sizes, relying on the elasticity of the synthetic blend to bridge the gap between different body types. The tailor's expert precision was suddenly deemed entirely unnecessary if the fabric itself could simply conform to your shape through sheer elastic tension. We traded structural engineering for chemical flexibility. This material revolution destroyed the tailor's fundamental value proposition. The tailor sold exactness in an era of rigidity. When the rigidity disappeared, the exactness lost its premium. Altering a polyester blend garment was also inherently more difficult and yielded poorer results than working with pure wool or cotton. And the synthetic threads behaved unpredictably under a hot iron. They puckered along the seams. The very fabrics that made mass production cheaper and more forgiving simultaneously made local repair and alteration exponentially harder. The neighborhood craftsman was caught between two massive industrial forces. On one side, military-derived sizing charts eliminated the need for bespoke measurements. On the other side, petroleum-based elastic fibers eliminated the physical discomfort of wearing an ill-fitting garment. A tailor cannot sell a perfect fit to a customer who has been convinced that a stretchy, mediocre fit is the pinnacle of modern convenience. The consumer stopped noticing the pooling fabric at the ankles or the unnatural tension across the buttons. The eye adjusted to the new baseline. The need for a tape measure, and the chalk dust and the three-way mirror evaporated. The machine of mass retail had successfully decoupled the human body from the craft of clothing it. The localized ecosystem began to starve. Without the constant stream of minor adjustments, the economics of keeping a shop open on a busy commercial street simply stopped making sense. The heavy-duty sewing machine sat idle for longer periods. The spools of thread gathered dust. The shift was irreversible. We had completely outsourced the concept of human proportion to an algorithm of stretchy plastics and rigid charts. The final blow did not come from a change in fabric. It came from a sudden, violent collapse in geography. In 1960, 95% of the clothing sold in the United States was manufactured entirely domestically. By the time the calendar flipped to the year 2000, and that number had plummeted to roughly 2%. The global garment industry packed up its massive industrial sewing machines and crossed the ocean. Assembly lines moved rapidly to countries where labor cost pennies on the dollar. The entire supply chain was aggressively optimized for speed and volume over durability. This specific globalization birthed the era of fast fashion. Massive retail brands pioneered an entirely new commercial model. They didn't just offshore the manual labor, they radically accelerated the product cycle. Instead of 4 distinct seasons of clothing tied to the weather, they introduced 52 micro-seasons a year. New inventory arrived weekly. To sustain that kind of relentless retail velocity, the garments inherently had to be disposable. They were hastily stitched together with ultra-thin synthetic threads. They used lower-grade cottons that would barely survive a dozen trips through a standard heavy-duty washing machine. They weren't built to be kept. They certainly weren't built to be meticulously repaired. This shift completely destroyed the economic foundation of the local tailor. Look closely at the actual math. In 1950, the average household spent roughly 12% of its total income on apparel. Families bought significantly fewer items, but those individual items were serious structural investments. By 2010, that total spending had dropped to less than 3% of household income. Yet the average person was buying 5 times as many physical garments. The sheer volume of clothing exploded while the individual unit price totally cratered. We stopped buying a few durable staples. We started buying disposable trends by the pound. By the early 2000s, the basic math of mending had inverted completely. The neighborhood tailor still had to pay commercial rent in a bustling, expensive city. They still had to pay for municipal electricity, specialized heavy-duty sewing equipment, and their own rising cost of living. A skilled craftsman requires a living wage to survive. Taking in the waist of a lined suit jacket takes considerable time. Hemming a pair of trousers requires exact measured precision. It is physical, manual labor that simply cannot be automated away by a computer algorithm. The tailor had to charge a baseline rate commensurate with their geography and their accumulated skill. Why pay a craftsman $25 to hem a pair of trousers when the trousers themselves only cost $19 at the mall? The answer, why, for the vast majority of consumers, was that you simply didn't. The economic justification for the alteration vanished instantly. It made absolutely zero financial sense to invest skilled, expensive domestic labor into a piece of imported, highly disposable fabric. You wore the cheap pants exactly as they were. If the hems dragged on the concrete ground, you just let them fray. If a side seam ripped after 3 washes, you threw the garment directly into a donation bin or the garbage. Then you walked back into the store and bought a brand new replacement for less than the cost of the original repair ticket. Repair shops that had successfully anchored local communities for decades suddenly faced an impossible, unresolvable equation. You cannot run a viable local business charging premium hourly prices to fix inherently worthless goods. The master technicians who deeply understood complex drape and fabric tension either quietly retired or were forced into highly specialized, high-end luxury niche markets. The neighborhood tailor shop slowly transitioned into a generic dry cleaner that merely offered basic, rudimentary hemming on the side. The deep expertise, the unique ability to completely recut a vintage jacket or flawlessly salvage a torn silk lining, became incredibly scarce. This was the climax of the disappearance. The physical infrastructure of local clothing maintenance was completely wiped off the map. You stopped treating your clothes as permanent assets. They became temporary consumables, ultimately no different than a paper towel or a plastic cup. We gladly accepted the terrible fit because the immediate price tag was intoxicatingly low. The fast fashion model aggressively demanded a culture of endless replacement, built entirely on hyperabundance and extreme convenience. The tailor was the ultimate casualty of this new reality. They stood as the last line of defense against disposability. But when the retail cost finally dropped below the repair cost, that defense broke permanently. A vital piece of local, working-class infrastructure was gone. You hold the torn shirt over the plastic rim of the kitchen trash can. You hesitate for a fraction of a second, feeling the synthetic blend between your fingers. You drop it in and immediately pull up the shopping app on your phone to order an identical replacement. That minor hesitation is the phantom limb of a forgotten cultural instinct. For most of modern human history, if a garment ripped, you mended it. You took it down the block. You knew the proprietor of the shop, and they knew your exact measurements. That physical third space permanently disappeared alongside the heavy-duty sewing machines. What we lost wasn't just the perfect hem. We lost the local infrastructure of deep tactile knowledge. We traded the reality of our own bodies for the convenience of a letter on a tag. The neighborhood tailor was a localized mirror. When you stood on that wooden pedestal, the clothes were forced to adapt to your physical reality. Today, the dynamic is entirely reversed. We adapt our bodies to the clothes. We blindly accept garments that bunch awkwardly at the knees, pull tightly at the shoulders, and sag lazily at the waistline. We hide our unique human geometry under stretchy layers of elastane and cheap polyester. Thus, we have been conditioned to strongly believe that if a medium does not perfectly fit, our bodies are somehow inherently incorrect. We automatically internalize the structural failure of the mass-produced garment. The tailor historically served as the necessary mediator between the industrial factory and the individual human. They consistently provided the crucial buffer of basic dignity. Without them, we are left entirely at the mercy of statistical averages and completely disposable retail trends. The culture of meticulous repair, built entirely on careful stewardship and inherent financial value, finally gave way to a culture of rapid, endless replacement. It fundamentally changed our deep relationship with the physical objects we wear every single day. The traditional tailor shop is permanently gone, but understanding exactly why it existed and why we willingly allowed it to disappear tells you something vital about the modern world. We did not simply lose a skilled trade to the relentless march of global automation. We willingly surrendered our right to be measured as individuals.